The next section of the part 2, endgames for Class E players, which is 1,000 to 1199. In this example, I'm going to be learning how to use the king in the endgame. And so players that are just starting to tend to think about the king as an annoyance. In the middle game, they basically have their head on a guillotine. Everything's coming for them. Queens, rooks, bishops, knights, everything. And so people think of the king of being a weaker piece. Sadly, this situation isn't always wisdom. In the opening, you want to castle your king. Get the king to safety. But when you get to the end game, where there's just king and pawns, the king becomes a very strong piece. Nearly as strong, or some say stronger, than a bishop or knight. Unfortunately, the terror that people get in the middle game and the early game keep people from bringing their king to the center. When you get to the end game, when they're pawns and kings, they take on more of a significance. Since the threat to the king is no longer real, because the enemy's army is a lot smaller than it would be, both players should rush their kings to the center of the board as quickly as possible, or to the side that the pawns are on. Once the board clears of pieces, a player must make use of everything that you have. The time has come for the king, which is finally safe from a possible assault by the larger enemy force, to emerge and lead the remains of his army to a victory. The message is very simple. When the endgame occurs, rush your king to the center of the board. Silman gives us some useful advice. In the endgame, pawns and the king take on an enormous significance. In general, when the endgame is reached, you want to rush your king to the center of the board. Because of the king's importance, the E player, or those with a rating under 1200 like myself, need to take the first steps in understanding the basic movements of the king and the white and black king's relation to one another. It is very important to look over this example again and again and again until the ideas are fully absorbed. To start, let's take a quick look at this important endgame that occurs all the time. In this position, it is black to move. You have a white king on d3, you've got a white pawn on d4, and you have the black king on d5. Although white can't mate with a king and a lone pawn, he can promote this pawn to a queen. A rook will also do, but it might as well go for the biggest gun possible. As a result of this fact, every king and pawn versus king situation is all about one thing. Can the pawn promote? In this position, it is black to move, and black wants to stop you from queening, which will lead to a draw. And so what you would like to do is you always bring the king back from the pawn. You bring it back. So when the king comes back to d6, when it's directly in front of the pawn, you want to try and keep the white king from being able to advance to the front. And the way that you do that is you will bring your king back directly back from the pawn, keeping your king in front of the pawn as often as possible. The white king is going to come over to e4 because it's wanting to get to one of these three key squares in the front, which is the e5, d5, and c5 squares. If the white king can get in front of its pawn, then it has a much better chance of queening this pawn. After this, it is black's move. Let's go ahead and prevent the king from coming forward by going king to e6. What this does is this gives us what's called the opposition, which we will get into a lot more in detail in the next video. But basically what it is we're preventing the king from coming in front of the pawn by coming over to d5. Obviously, white can do a lot of different things, but as long as if the king moves back, you're going to move your king directly back in front of the pawn again. Most of the time, though, people are going to push this pawn up to d5 with check, which whenever that happens, just step your king directly in front of the pawn again. Keep this king in front of the pawn as often as you can, and taking the opposition from the opposing king as often as you can as well. Most of the time, white will come back to d4. We'll do the same pattern again. Go back to d7. Let's say the king comes over to c5. You're going to come over here to c7, which is going to block the king from coming out in front of the pawn. So let's go ahead and do this again. d6 check. King comes over to d7. White king comes back to d5. And we're just going to keep doing this pattern. d8. King comes over to e6. Black king comes over to e8. Check. With d7. Black king comes back over to d8. And here, No matter what this white king does, it's going to be a draw. For example, the king comes over to d6. This is stalemate. I can't escape over to e8 or c8. I obviously can't go to e7 or c7 because of the king. This is a stalemate, therefore a draw. If this king goes anywhere else, if it moves to any other position on the board, then I'm going to be taking this pawn. For example, that's obviously a draw due to insufficient material. Let's show this again from a different position, just to show you that this pattern works in all positions. When you have this position, the king is not in front of the pawn, you can draw this game as black. Obviously, anytime that you are able to move directly back from the pawn, do so. Keep your king in front of this pawn. King comes over to e4 in this position, e6, e5 check. King comes back over to, f6. King comes back to f4. Now it's our move as black. Go ahead and bring it back to f7. Let's say they go over to g5. You just take the opposition, g7. Pawn to f6 check. King to f7. King to f5. Pull back directly back from the pawn. King comes over to e6, e8, f7 check. King to f8. And once again, we're back in that position where this is a draw. Black was able to manage his goal, which is a draw. But do you know how they did it? Could white have improved their play at all? To understand what's going on and what the best move for both sides meant, we need a basic knowledge of oppositions. In the next video, we're going to leap into that subject, thoroughly master it, and then return back to this position here. And we'll do that in our next video.